This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen and choose your preferred method. Welcome to the City of Chicago, Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. We have adapted our regular business education workshops at City Hall into these webinars until further notice. Please note, any website or email that I mentioned will be posted in the chat box. For those seeking business license assistance, we strongly encourage the processing of license and permits online. Business license can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org, or you can call 312-74-GO-BIZ. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. To learn more about this program, please visit chicago.gov/business education. This webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/Chicago BACP. We encourage all attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box to send your questions. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Please note that the views, information, and opinions expressed during this webinar are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Business Affairs, Consumer Protection, or the City of Chicago. Today's webinar is entitled Creating an Inclusive Workplace Culture in Times of Uncertainty, presented by SCORE Chicago. At this time, I will now turn this webinar over to Hannah for us to begin.
Thank you so much, Stella and the BACP team. We always appreciate our partnership and collaboration with you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar 2 of our HR and Workforce Development Series, Creating an Inclusive Workplace Culture in Times of Uncertainty webinar. My name is Hannah Fernandez, and I'm the chapter chair of SCORE Chicago. SCORE Chicago has been around as a resource partner of the SBA since 1964, providing free and also confidential business mentoring for business owners across the country. So whether you are a new entrepreneur or you've been in business for a long time, our SCORE mentors can help you start, grow, and scale your businesses. To schedule an appointment with our mentors, go to our website at chicago.score.org. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Dr. Tanya Bigelow is a native Chicagoan. Tanya has worked in various positions in corporate America, which includes serving as a physicist, project manager, and business owner. She's also a mother and a wife. While she served as a mother of 4 beautiful children, she was still driven to be the best in her field and determined to manage her studies. Dr. Tanya is an example that will show that you can indeed have it all. With a broad scope of education and degrees from science to business, this powerfully dynamic speaker operates with a keen objective to emerge as the best version of herself while helping others to do the same. Through transformational leadership and coaching, both Dr. Tanya and her clients emerge as their most radiant selves. Tanya, you're on.
Well, hello, Hannah, and thank you so much for that warm welcome. And hello to each and every one of you. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. I just want to make sure that you all could see it before we go ahead. Yes, awesome. So hello, each and every one of you, and welcome to our presentation today. And today's presentation, oh, I lost you all. Okay. Today's presentation is entitled Creating an Inclusive Workplace Culture in Times of Uncertainty. And we have a subtitle of The Possibility of Diversity Within Your Organization. So again, I just want to say welcome to each and every one of you. I am super excited to be here to support the business owners, those who are already in business or those who are considering business ownership, you are starting off with a fabulous title of diversity and inclusion. So we want to first go over the overview of social and emotional focus areas to empower diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the first thing we want to talk about is who this training is for. So this training is for the forward-thinking corporate leadership of today who sees the need to address disparities in the workplace culture caused by social barriers and biased thinking. What you are going to learn today is a highlight of objectives for training, which includes defining DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the benefits of inclusion, and how to develop a plan of action for change. Thirdly, what change are we looking to experience? So while you can gather information about equity and inclusion from forums and books and trainings like the one you're experiencing today, you can expand your community outreach as a result of experiencing this change. But the most significant place that you can implement change as a result of this training today will be a change within. And then fourthly, why is this training valuable for you and your business? Well, it's important to accentuate diversity, equity, and inclusion to hold organizations accountable for work towards a better and more equitable future for employees. And I think we have one more point of overview today, which is how you can implement the training. So those are the 5 things that we're going to go over today. So inclusive behaviors and practices are vital skills to cultivate, and luckily we can change what behaviors we had before, and we can emerge from who we are into who we want to be each and every day. So for many of you, you have no idea who I am. So I want to quickly answer the question of who is Dr. Tanya Biglow. So I'm a native Chicagoan. I was born and raised in the city of Chicago. I've left a couple of times for school, but outside of that, I am Chicago to the core. A little bit about what I have done. So I talked a little bit before about where I'm from, but what I've done over the years, I've served from a scientist to a business owner. So I've operated as a physicist. I've operated as a project coordinator, a project manager. I've managed dozens, and sometimes I think one corporation I was in charge of like over 100 employees. And I also currently serve as a business owner. Now, you may ask, what do I know? Well, I know a little bit about the subject. Coming from science and engineering, those were my first few degrees that I earned. But I also earned a degree in business. And in the process of doing that, I also received my doctorate in metaphysics. And that is where I received most of my personal development training. Here is where I work with small and medium-sized businesses to help coach them through decision-making and actions rather than having like an ego-based behavior. My services have supported them to experiencing higher levels of success. They have a more satisfied workforce, they experience growth and longevity in their business. I also have earned a degree in transformational leadership and coaching. I earned that degree as a postdoctorate degree. Here is where I received most of my social and emotional intelligence training. So not only do I support companies to grow and thrive, I also work with the owners and the employees on a personal level. So it's not just professional, it's also on a personal level as well. So the question you may ask after you know what I know, the question is, how will you grow? And so the first thing I would like to go over today are just our objectives for what we will review in today's training. So today will be jam-packed. We're going to have a lot of action. I am typically the type of person, I love to have fun. I love to enjoy myself. So I hope you all are here to do the same. In that process, however, I know that diversity and inclusion may be a very touchy subject, and it may not be a subject that people may find funny. I still want us to grow in this process to learn that just because we are going to have a very serious conversation, we can still look at it from, yes, these are the things that I used to do, and we can begin to move forward and say, how, or ask the question, how do I want to be, or how do I want to engage? How do I want to interact with other people moving forward? So our objectives today would be to first and foremost define DEI. We're also going to identify a major blocker of workforce inclusion. And we're also going to have a game or play a little game called the change game. So as we get started into the training, I want you all to make sure that you engage, and I may or may not see any questions that are posed. So if I don't capture the question during the presentation, I will make sure that I come back and we can look at those questions, okay? And in the meantime, as we are beginning the training, I also want to go over just a couple of rules of engagement. So the rules of engagement is really how you're going to get the most out of today's training. So the first rule is to participate fully. So as you hear information and you get ahas or have an aha moment, make sure you jot that down in your notes. If you have a question that comes up, make sure you type that question into the chat box, but make sure that you participate fully. Remove any distractions. Now, I know you are sitting in front of your computer. You probably have your tablet next to you. You probably have your iPhone or your Android phone on the other side. Some of us may even have our Apple Watches or our Fitbit or whatever other technical devices we use on a daily basis. I'm going to ask if you can just suspend the notion to check those devices so we can be fully present here today. So try to remove as many distractions as you can. And if you do choose to make comments or ask questions in the chat, please make sure that you express from your own experience. So I know for me, this may not be your situation, but I know for me, it is so easy for me to talk about everybody else's stuff and completely avoid my own stuff. But I'm going to ask if you can try to make sure that you put down the hat of being mom or being boss or being the manager. or being the dad, and put on the hat of how can I bring this information into my life and make an impact for my business, my organization, and those around me. And then also just be open. So sometimes we run into situations where this may not be a you thing. I know it's a me thing. Being someone who has several degrees, sometimes I can go into a situation and assume that I already know the answer. And I'm going to ask that you come to this presentation open-minded, and we may speak about topics that you've already heard about. Some of these topics you may have already done research on or training for yourself. My request is that you just remain open in the process. And then lastly, enjoy the process. Again, this is a very important topic, and we don't want to take it lightly, but I do want to ask that you enjoy this process. We're only going to be together for a short amount of time, and we'll get a chance to talk. I can read those questions and get a chance to engage at the end of the presentation. So let's jump right in. We are at the starting point, and we're going to go ahead and move forward powerfully. So what is DEI? So if we look at it, overall, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, is a term used to describe policies and programs that promote the representation and participation of different groups of individuals, including people of different ages, races, and all different kinds of orientation, right? So if we look at the DEI as a tenet that recognizes the value of diverse voices and centers inclusivity and employee well-being as a central facet of success. Basically, DEI brings value to life, companies, and they implement programs and initiatives that actively make our offices, your offices, more diverse and equitable and inclusive day in and day out. So if we look at diversity in a nutshell, diversity is the who of the conversation. So if we pause really quickly, we went through, I introduced myself and I said, the who of Tanya, the who, what, where, why, and how. We kind of went over that in the beginning. Now, with defining DEI, we're also going to go over the who, the what, and the how. And the first element of understanding more about inclusion and diversity is understanding the who and the what. So the who, and the part that we're going to talk about right now is diversity, and this is the who part. Diversity speaks to all traits of human differences. This could include social identities. This could include social group differences. This can include things like race and ethnicity and gender and creed and sex and gender identity and sexual identity and so many other topics. Overall, diversity means just different, right? And while we can have a diverse workforce, we live in a very diverse world. When we talk about the word diverse, we want to talk about it as it relates to respecting the differences and valuing all of the nuances that we have amongst each other. Additionally, we all have different dimensions of diversity, which will impact how we see the world, and it will also impact how we think the world sees us. So I want to look at diversity like this right here. Y'all see that? It's an onion. So when we look at an onion, if you were to look at it from the other side without the cut mark, it looks whole and complete, right? It's very smooth, it's one color. So when you look at this onion, you could see it as the external, like the outside of it. But the moment you make an incision inside of the onion, now you get an opportunity to see the different layers, right? So when I look at diversity, I look at diversity as an onion. So we can see the external sides of diversity. Like, you can tell that I'm an African-American woman, right? We see things like race. We see things like gender. You can, for the most part, tell age, right? But there are so many things that fall underneath the concept of diversity. Some of these things we cannot see. A lot of the things that we are going to talk about today as it relates to diversity are conversations that are conscious, and some of these diversities are unconscious. Like, so some of the diversified items that we cannot see would be who we like, who we love. And unless you speak and have a one-on-one conversation with individuals and you ask specific questions about certain topics, we have no idea what a person is like or what they're not like. So let's look at some of the differences that we could see. We can have personal differences. And we can have different beliefs. We can have limiting beliefs. Some of the differences that we can have are personal status, right? We can have different values. We can have different principles. We can also have different morals, as well as different geographical locations. Right? So those are differences that each and every one of us can have, but these are differences that you may not necessarily see when you first interact with a person. So let's define equity. So equity refers to a fair and just practice. It refers to policies that ensure all community members can thrive. Equity is different than equality in that equality implies treatment, or equality implies treating everyone as if their experiences are exactly the same. But the difference between equity, is that there are historic and current patterns that give certain individuals a different advantage over other individuals. Next, we are going to define inclusion. So inclusion is really the how of DEI. So when we talk about the who and the what, which is what we just talked about with diversity and equity, when we talk about inclusion, this is how we can merge diversity and create equity in the workplace or in the world in general, but specifically in this conversation, creating equity and diversity in the workplace. Inclusion refers to a community where all members are respected and they feel respected. When inclusion is present, a sense of belonging is fostered throughout the entire community. Everyone can participate, everyone can achieve their goals, and everyone has the possibility of reaching their potential. While diversity is essential, it is not sufficient in the DEI equation. An institution can be both diverse and non-inclusive at the same time. Therefore, a sustained practice of creating an inclusive environment that's necessary for success, we would need to make sure that we have both diversity, equity, and inclusion. Inclusion is fully leveraging the differences of all team members to create a collaborative, creative, and inviting environment. If you have diversity without inclusion, you will soon lose diversity. To have a fully inclusive environment, we must confront our biases and dedicate ourselves to what I've learned over the last few years as being lifelong learners. So what we're going to move to next is our major blockers in the workplace environment. But I want to pause really quickly because I just want to see if we have any questions. Now, I also want to make sure that you all could see me and everything is going well. Okay. So I don't see anything, so we're just going to keep moving forward. Okay, so there are many blockers of workplace diversity, right? There are many different things that could impact inclusion and diversity in the workplace. The one thing that we are going to focus on today in this presentation is bias. So DEI training is critical to building a safe and equitable workplace for all employees. It has the potential to help an organization uncover hidden biases and address unfair hiring and development practice. It can also benefit a company's culture, boost growth, and change the lives of your marginalized employees. So when we look at bias, we want to define it, right? So what is bias? So bias is the tendency or inclination or prejudice towards or against someone, something, or a group. Bias can be positive or it can be negative. Bias can also be conscious or unconscious. Bias can even be cognitive. Bias, when we actually look at bias, we create biases based on our lived experiences and our biases are influenced by our parents, by our peers, by our parishioners, our culture, and even the media. While we know that biases have all these different parts, there are many facets of bias. Bias can be personal, bias can be impersonal, bias can be organizational, and bias can be institutional. How is that possible? Because our companies and our organizations are made of people. So while our individual biases can be different based on our personal experiences, studies show that many of us hold several similar biases. Typically, these biases are harmful or historically marginalized groups. And the bottom line of this entire conversation, whether you think you have biases or you don't think you have biases, the truth of the matter is we all have biases. However, we can grow to the place where we can acknowledge and learn to think before acting on these biases. We can begin the process of change. And I want to pause really quickly here, because even though we all have biases, we all also have the capacity to change and shift those biases. And the name of the game is not about being perfect. It's not about completely erasing those biases, because for many of us, we've lived with these biases 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, some of us 70 years, or however many years you've been alive on this planet. So this conversation is not about completely erasing those biases and throwing them away. The name of the game is about awareness and knowing that we have them. So when they do show up, we have the opportunity to make a different choice. Okay, so we want to ask the question, and this is the time for us to ask questions of ourselves. So I'm going to pose some questions here. So if you have a pen or piece of paper, write that down. I hope you know how your devices, but if you do, and that's what you use to take notes on, feel free to do that. I know for many people, having a pen and piece of paper is like archaic. I'm sorry. But I'm going to ask a few questions. And this is to help you think, right? So how do you see the world? Right? Just pause and just answer that question. How do you see the world? And then another question where they all showed up, so you can go through and answer those questions. How do you think the world sees you? So if we look at in my introduction, Hannah explained that I'm a mother, I'm a scientist, like I have a lot of degrees, and that's how for a long time I saw the world. I saw the world through the lens of science. I now see the world through the lens of metaphysics. I also now see the world through the lens of social and emotional intelligence. So how do you see the world? Another example of how do you think the world sees you could be, I think the world sees me as mom, right? As a person who has a lot of degrees. I think the world sees me as a pretty happy, lively, vibrant, bubbly person. So how do you think the world sees you? And then let's take it to the workplace, right? How do you see your workforce? How do you see your team, whether you're the owner of the organization or you are the manager in a department? How do you see your team? Another question is, how do you think the world sees your team, right? Do you think your team is diverse? Do you think your team speaks the voice of everyone who you currently serve? You know, those are the type of things you want to just think about. And then the last question, what viewpoint would be missing from your team if you don't have this sense of inclusion? Okay. So I'll give you a couple of minutes, or about a minute, to wrap up your question or your answers, because I have the questions. Next, though, we want to discuss, and we're going to stay on the topic of bias. We want to cover the pitfalls of unchecked bias. So if your questions before were in any way biased, right, here's an opportunity for us to see what are some of the pitfalls of not checking and changing these biases. So number one, you could have a sense of exclusion, right? That could be a risk of exclusion. And as a creator, right, you need as much input into creating your products. So when a bias is not checked, your products also may be missing some elements, right? When bias is not checked, your products and your service will not be as useful or as accurate as it could be. You will most likely have to do more work. So you go to production, and you see that there are things that are missing. So now you have to come back to the drawing board. You have to rethink the product, rethink the service, because the biases were in place when you created the product. What else? You also can experience discrimination, right? Bias can lead to prejudice and discrimination. Another pitfall of unchecked bias is an impact on decisions. So if we look at bias is ingrained in everything that we say and everything that we do. So the design of everything that you do for your business and your organization, it's impacted because that bias, again, is ingrained in our decisions. So let's look at some studies, right? So there was a study of 500 companies, and the study was about bias. So they looked at when they went to production, they went to the marketplace. These are some of the stats that happen as a result of going to the marketplace with all of their biases unchecked. So 64% lost revenue, 64% of this 500 employee or business study. 64% lost revenue, 58% lost customers, 43% lost employees, and then 35% incurred legal fees due to, and I don't know if you can see it's because you can see it's due to their actions, right? So there is a huge cost here if these biases continually go unchecked. So how does this happen, right? If we know that we have biases or we don't know that we have biases, what is really going on? Because for some people, maybe this is the first time that you're hearing like, oh, wow, I may have a bias. My workforce may be skewed in how we see the world and how we think the world sees us. So how this happens is by making assumptions. What should we build is the question. And when we have this question, we are missing, or we have these assumptions of who we should build for and how it should work. So if we don't know the inner workings or the inner thoughts of our customer, how will we know what to build or how it should work in order to fulfill their wants and needs? Next, if we are only hearing part of the story, So you want to make sure that you're asking yourself, who's the decision maker? Who's involved in our decision-making process? And whose voice is being heard in this process? So you may have a diverse organization, but you still want to ask yourself, am I listening to all parties involved? Or am I only listening to certain people in the hierarchy? So let's just talk a little bit about some common biases that could be present either personally or professionally, and professionally meaning within your organization. So there are group biases. So they're like in-group and out-group biases. So this bias is a pattern of favoring or prioritizing people. You can also tend to certain people in the group by excluding other people in the group. Or so you have what I grew up learning is the in crowd and the out crowd. This also happens within the workforce. You have pattern recognition bias. So pattern recognition bias is a tendency to make decisions based on information, people, and perspectives that match mental models, beliefs, and perspectives, right? So the models are often based on images that you've been exposed to or not exposed to. Like if you're used to seeing a certain picture in the media, you're going to tend to lean towards creating images that resemble the media or your lived experiences. Next, another common bias is a hierarchy of bias. So within the organization, you may defer to people higher in the hierarchy and minimize or completely dismiss the voice and ideas of people who are more junior in the organization. You can also experience gender bias. What does that look like? Upholding and promoting stereotypical gender norms in workplace and in the production design. Lastly, another bias that's common is racial bias. So racial bias occurs when a personal or sometimes unreasoned judgment is made solely on an individual's race. Now, we've talked a lot about what diversity is, what inclusion is, and we've also gave examples of common biases that are present in our world and more often in our workplace. Now we want to jump to the section of the how. So now we know what the what is, we know what to do. Now we want to know, well, how do I change, Dr. Tanya? What steps do I need to put in place in order to remove these biases, or at a minimum, check them? So one of the main things we want to focus on here is change management for diversity and inclusion. So we want to make sure that we are constantly throwing out assumptions, right? We don't want to live in a space where we're assuming that we know, right? We want to make sure that we hear from everyone. And not only are we hearing from everyone, but we are also heeding everyone's voice. We want to hear from everyone and we want to heed their voice. And then we also want to make sure that we highlight past patterns. If we go back and we look at who we have been and how we have been in the past, when we learn how to highlight those patterns, we can, again, remember, this is the name of the game is awareness. Now we can make different choices when those biases come up. And we can also question inclusion. We can ask ourselves, is the voice of our customer being heard? Am I including every employee in the process? You want to just make sure that, well, we want to make sure that we're always asking the question, who am I including, and am I including everyone? So here are some final questions that that could serve our companies as we move forward. This is something to think about. How diverse is your organization? How would you describe your company culture? How do you make others feel included? How are employees often recognized for excellent work? And what work standards and goals are in place for each position, right? So that actually concludes our presentation for today. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and hopefully I can see, I didn't see any questions. Yay. Well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a not so good thing, but I'm gonna go here and see if we have any other questions.
It looks like we had some along the way, and I know that either Stella or Toma could help you as well.
Okay.
It's your call.
Yeah, I would love that. So I see one from Keisha, who says, as a potential business owner, how can I develop a creative workplace environment during a pandemic? Oh, that's a great question, right? So as we are working in today's society, there's a for people like me who are like very extroverted, like I love touching and, being in the presence of other people. But with technology, we still have that same level of interaction. But it's like on steroids now. So you can do things like these type of interactions, like with Zoom meetings. You can now, like we can actually talk on the phone via our computers. So you can have group chats. I love, if you could tell by my presentation, I love colors, I love pictures. So you can, like in the morning, like for my team now, I'm always sending good morning messages, and they're always, and it's not really all that good because I work with a lot of men. So this is like, yeah, okay, whatever. But I'm really bubbly, but I bring that to the table. So there are a lot of different ways, but the biggest way that I would actually incorporate inclusivity into my organization, Keisha, is to ask the people who I work with, because they can give you 100% of what you need to know, and you don't have to try to reinvent the wheel. Ask them, they'll tell you, and you can move forward powerfully. They are in the chat. Am I missing the chat? Oh, I think I'm looking at thank you. So the questions are in the chat. The questions are in the chat. Okay, let me move up. I don't know if any of them has chance. We said until they hear and see you. Okay, good. Here, good afternoon. The question is bias the same as ideology? I can't pronounce that word, Mrs. Sanchez. Ideology. I think that's how you pronounce it. I want to say it is similar, right? There are ways of thinking that we have, and it came from where it came from, whether it was our background, whether it was taught to us, or we chose to take that on. So I would say, yes, it's very similar. I guess I would call it cousins, right? I would say that they're cousins. John Ray had a question. Religious beliefs. So in these troubled times, when some people are using religious beliefs to discriminate, can we ask potential employees their feelings on equity and present the company's view on inclusion? I definitely say that is a thumbs up and a yes. So as business owners and owner operators, you have the opportunity to create the culture, the mission statement, and the principles that your organization will uphold each and every day. And once those principles are defined, outlined and defined and agreed upon by the stakeholders, that's something that you can disseminate throughout the organization. So whether you're a party of 2 or you're a company of 200,000, the culture and the views of the company, they start from the head. And if leadership is willing to share that and live that, it will spread throughout the organization powerfully. So I hope that answers your question, John J. How am I doing, Hannah, on time?
We're good. We have a lot of time. We actually have over 30 minutes, so no need to rush.
Okay.
Depending on how many questions.
Okay. We do have questions. So Keisha, I see the world. Okay, Keisha, I see you again. So I see the world as now evolving. Yeah, I think I was leading into your question, Keisha, as it relates to technology, steady becoming as an online environment, and the world must get on board. Okay. I don't know if that was a question. Okay, yes. Don't be afraid to step into the technology zone. We are here, Keisha, and I don't think we're turning back from the technology zone. If anything, I believe the technology zone is just going to multiply exponentially, by the way. Okay, Arturo had a question. One of his biggest struggles is how to interface with customers without them feeling pressured about the world conflicts happening in the world. I know, Arturo, it's kind of hard to avoid something that's just right in front of our faces. The problem happens when customers feel fear about their people's bias. For every customer, I remove myself from media's general bias and only go by, I don't know if there's a question there. Let's see. How can we make them feel welcome when other companies do not? Arturo, that is your unique selling proposition if others don't, right? There is all, and as small and medium-sized business owners, I say that we actually have an extra bonus because we not only have the opportunity to create the culture and establish the principles for our organization, we have an opportunity to infuse ourselves and our own personalities and our own likes and our own wants and our own highs and our own principles into that conversation. So my recommendation, Arturo, would be to look within and to see what is it that you ask yourself, what is it that I want to create as a culture as I interact with my customers? Create that as a general script or a general way of interacting, highlight that as a principle, and then move forward powerfully with that. Okay. my workplace. Sabrina, I see you, Sabrina. Okay, yes. God make all things possible working within us. Absolutely. You're welcome, Alejandro. I don't know if that was me or to the prayer that Sabrina provided. Great. Olivia. See the world 3 periods of time happening. Thinking out the box. And Hannah, if you see that I'm missing a question, please just ping me, because I see a lot of comments, not necessarily a lot of questions. So if I'm missing one, just please let me know.
Tanya, I think there's another question from Amanda.
Amanda
is asking, what are some ways we can establish equity in our workplace, or common ways that equity doesn't exist, so that we can be aware of ways to make changes to benefit our organization?
Oh, so in the workplace, so this could be if you're an owner, or if you are like a manager, or even if you're just an employee and you report to a manager, you report to your boss. I would say it all starts with a conversation, right? It all starts with having the conversation and asking, do we have any diversity, equity, and inclusion policies in place? What does that look like for our organization? If you have a voice and you want to share that, express that. Let them know, hey, I have some ideas that I would like to share. Is the organization open to hearing those suggestions? Is there any more room in the department for DEI? The whole goal and if we go back to the conversation of bias, right? Bias is only removed once we begin to have those conversations. So the moment you begin to have that conversation, that's when the vision of what inclusion could look like in your organization will become. That's when it will start. Any other questions?
Thank you. Next question from Lakeisha. Does having a diverse board leadership help to stem biases?
Please repeat one more time. I'm sorry.
Of course. Does having a diverse board or leadership help to stem biases?
So I'm gonna repeat. I think I heard, does having a diverse workforce help like stop biases? Would that be correct?
Having a diverse board or leadership. Board or leadership.
Okay. Oh, how does it impact the board or leadership? I don't, I'm sorry. Maybe I am missing.
Lakeisha, can you please write down the question again?
Okay, I think we're gonna get it.
Okay, so the question, okay, so it's the same question.
Does having a diverse board or a diverse leadership help to stem biases? I would say yes. I apologize for not understanding the question. Please charge it to my head or the sound, not my heart. I would say it definitely does. When you are communicating and making decisions on behalf of the organization, having the viewpoint of all parties involved at the top in leadership, around the stakeholders, that helps to make sure when decisions are made, everyone's needs and wants are addressed. When change occurs, we think about what will happen or how this will impact all parties. So I would say absolutely, Lakeisha, having a diverse leadership will definitely help to kind of stymie biases and also help us to understand each other. Because again, the moment we start to talk and communicate, that's when we begin to see the world differently. And we begin to understand that how I thought about things before was skewed towards my experience, but I never experienced it the way Hannah experienced it. I never experienced it the way Tanya experienced it. So I have a new outlook on it, and it can completely change the culture and the products that your company and organization creates.
Thank you. Another question from Tammy. How does a disabled worker get help with bias in the workplace?
Oh, that is good. So we are at a good time in society. Why? Because diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the top of most organizations' conversation. So I would, again, inquire within that organization about their plan for diversity, equity, inclusion. And wherever you are, if you're local here in the Chicagoland area, or whether you're not local, go to your local area and see what are the laws, like what does it state and what does it govern, what's the governance in that area that says how they should treat people who have disabilities. What are the laws that are currently in place? Like at this point, if you want to know how an individual can do that for themselves, there's going to be a little bit of heavy lifting, not really heavy lifting, but research that they would have to do on their behalf. But once they have this information, the goal is to take that information and weigh it against what the organization already has in place, and then make a stance or begin to have that conversation to make sure that what's in place within the organization is what is in place and in alignment with the city and the government within that area.
Thank you. These were all the questions for now. If anyone has a question, please write them down right now and Tanya will answer.
Thank you. Oh, I think Amanda had a question too. What are some ways that we can establish it? Oh, I think we already asked that question.
Yes.
Yay.
Erendira is asking, any recommended book?
Oh, I say, hold on, stand by. Let me get the name of it for you. Let me get the name of it for you. I have it right here.
As you're looking for it, Tanya, there's a lot of just kudos to you for a wonderful presentation. And they're saying they love your passion and your energy. Just to let you know that.
Thank you. So there is an author by the name of David F. George. David F. George. I highly recommend his books. He really talks a lot about diversity. He talks a lot about inclusion. More specifically, he talks a lot about unconscious bias. So one of the books that I would definitely recommend would be Unconscious Bias by David F. George. He also has a book entitled Diversity and Inclusion. What if you are looking for a book to help you just better understand who you are as a leader, or how you can emerge as a more empowered employee, a more empowered manager, a more empowered mom, dad, just more empowered, I highly recommend, just forgive all my footnotes here. I don't know if y'all can see it. I don't know if you can see it, but it's called Mindsight by Daniel J. Siegel, MD. And I can type the name of it, his last name, but the name of the book is called Mindsight. It's a very good personal transformation book. It talks a lot about the science of transformation, but it gives very good, just real life examples of relationships and one-on-one people engagements that anybody can relate to.
Thank you, Tanya. We don't have any questions. Thank you so much for this great presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us. Please stay connected with us, and for those who are interested in being mentored, whether to start or grow the business, please reach out to us. The website is chicago.score.org. As soon as we receive your request, we will assign it to a mentor to work with you. Now back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Toma and Tanya. Just a few more thank yous. You know, they said that you're really engaging and relatable. A lot of kudos, great presentation. So just wanted to go ahead and thank you so much for that, because as small business owners, we really need to remember that diverse and inclusive teams are more creative, innovative, and also higher performing. And I love what you said about having awareness so that we can make different choices, right? So we can make choices when these biases come up. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Of course. And so as to everybody else that's listening, as Thomas said, you're not alone. SCORE Chicago, the city of Chicago, are here to support you. So you could go ahead and get free mentoring at chicago.score.org. And back to you, Stella, for the final words. Thank you so much for the partnership.
Thank you, Tanya. I was paying attention, especially the part on being a better parent, because, you know, we all struggle with, am I doing the right things as a mom? And then sometimes you're just like, man, yeah, I am. But then you back to questioning yourself. So I was definitely paying attention to that, and I wrote down the name of the book that you suggested. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, please send an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Again, that email address is bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org to receive credit for your attendance in today's webinar. We have an expo, a free remote expo coming up May 5th. To sign up, to register for that expo, you will visit chicago.gov/biz expo, BIZ expo. Again, that's chicago.gov/biz expo, BIZ expo. That expo is scheduled for May 5th of this year, and we do plan on going back in person for expos. So this will be our last and final remote expo. We are very excited about that. And thank you again to SCORE and to Tanya for today's presentation. To find out about our upcoming webinars, please visit chicago.gov/business education, chicago.gov/business education. And I hope to see everyone on Friday for Friday's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you, everyone.
Bye.